Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's Hallowstein video. I'm so happy we can meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this craziness today, you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or BRATTERSTEIN, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the horrific murder that inspired the cult classic horror movie, Jennifer's Body. Now, if you've seen Jennifer's Body and you don't know of this case, you might be like, it seems absolutely insane that that movie could be based on anything in reality, but the real life event, the murder of Elyse Pahler, is even more hard to believe that it was real. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out new videos every single week, sometimes twice a week, like this week, hopefully. And I'd love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically, you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. One of us. One of us. And you can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter if you want. They're both BRATTERSTEIN, but no pressure. So now that I'm done essentially begging you to join my cult, we can get into this video. Now, the movie Jennifer's Body, if you've never seen it, it stars Megan Fox, and spoiler alert, it is about a band who is touring, right? They're going through towns. And Jennifer, who's played by Megan Fox, her and her friend go to see this band play. They watch the band play. Jennifer and this guy are like making eyes at each other. And this band has mistaken Jennifer for a virgin somehow. And after the show, take her with them with some very sinister ideas in mind, but not what you think. They instead then take Jennifer out into the middle of nowhere and attempt to sacrifice her to the devil so that their band will be more successful. Now, that must sound crazy. That must sound like the movie makers taking liberties with a horrible story. But you'd be wrong. That part is actually true. That premise is what actually happened to Elyse Pahler. And then if you keep watching the movie, Jennifer, it turns out, wasn't a virgin, and this is a big problem because in the spell you needed a virgin, so instead of being sacrificed, she becomes a succubus and then starts killing people. And that's where it gets to be kind of off the rails. But the true story of the murder of Elyse Pahler by a bunch of little shitheads in a band that did it, they killed her in a ritual sacrifice to try to make their band better. That is true. And what happened to her is even more horrifying than you can imagine. With all of that said, I'm going to tell you the story of this crime today, and while I do, I'm going to be putting on some makeup. Now, if that's not really your thing, thanks for stopping by. I hope you find a channel that you like more, but if you're kind of on the fence, like that sounds weird, I don't know how I feel, maybe stick around. You'll probably be surprised by how much you like me, okay? Okay. Now, with all of that said, come, gather around, and let me tell you the story of the murder of Elyse Pahler, the murder that inspired the horror movie Jennifer's Body. On the night of July 22nd, 1995, 15-year-old Elyse Pahler was at home watching TV, a movie with her family, when she received a phone call. She took the call in private, and once she got off the call, she told her family, you know, I'm tired, I'm going to go to bed. So she told them she loved them, she said she'd see them tomorrow, all that jazz, and then she retreated into her bedroom. This was at about 9:15 at night, and this was going to be the last time that her family would ever see her alive. Once inside her room, she took all of her pillows that were on her bed and she put them under her blanket, a la Ferris Bueller, to make it seem like she was there sleeping in her bed. And then she waited for her family to go to sleep before sneaking out of the house. And this was easy for her to do because unlike most of us who had to sneak out of like a bedroom window, she actually had doors in her room. Her room was on a separate area of the house, and she had the French doors, 2 doors that just opened out so she could just literally walk right out of her house, which, 1, I'm jealous, but 2, this didn't end up being very good for her because she left that night to meet up with some friends and never came home again. Elyse Pahler, named after her grandmother Elyse, was the eldest of 4 children with 2 sisters named Jenny and Christina and a brother named Ryan. She was born to parents David and Lizanne Pahler on April 24th, 1980, making her a Taurus. Elyse and her family moved to Arroyo Grande, California in 1989, and at first, Elyse was homeschooled by her mother. Her mother said of her, and I quote, "Always a gentle-natured girl who in many creative ways expressed her love for the beautiful and peaceful things in the world. encouraging friends to be proud of themselves and develop their talents. She gave them courage to be what they only dreamed of before. Lovingly, she listened to those close to her, letting them know things will get better. We have each other. Her childish laughter was contagious, especially when joined by her Elyse smile, bright from the light of God shining through her soul. At the time that Elyse was murdered, her mother was no longer homeschooling her, and she was attending a public high school as a freshman, and she was doing really good in school. She was well liked, she had good grades, she played on the soccer team, and she just had a couple of close best friends, 2 girls that she hung out with all the time, and they were just like typical teenage girls. They like to gossip, and they like to talk about school, and they like to talk about boys, and all of them had just recently become obsessed with Tom Cruise because they saw Interview with a Vampire and thought he was just hot, hot, hot. She was described as a vivacious and curious teenager who had a flair for the dramatic, and she even sewed her own clothes, like she made her own dresses for school. At the time that she went missing, she had just sort of started getting into her rebellious stage, which is, you know, common at 15 anyway, and apparently it was even more kind of common in this area because at the time that this happened in the area that they were living, crime in general was sort of at a rise. Kids were a little more prone to being a little delinquents, and drugs were a pretty big problem in the area. And Elyse had started, you know, hanging out with new friends, different types of people than the girls that she had always hung out with. Started getting into drinking and skipping class and smoking weed, maybe a little bit more. It got so bad at one point that she actually got suspended from school for 5 days because she was notably intoxicated at school, and her parents were like, absolutely fucking not. And they enrolled her, committed her to a rehab facility, probably to A, get her substance abuse under control, and B, put a little bit of fear in her to get her shit back on track. It was while in this rehab center, the Mariposa Community Recovery Center, that Elyse would become acquainted with a boy who would be one of 3 boys who would eventually take her life. On the morning of July 23rd, 1995, when Elyse's family found her room in the condition she left it, pillows under the blanket but no sign of Elyse, they reasonably freaked out because though she had a rebellious streak and she did sneak out from time to time, she always returned home before morning. So they were like, this is not normal and definitely something to be worried about. So they called the police, and the police investigated it, but they were just kind of like, well, she left on her own. She'll probably be back soon. She's just a runaway, etc., etc. Her parents immediately thought this was bullshit because though she was, you know, a little bit rebellious right now and she hadn't gone to rehab, she had no reason to want to run away from her life. She loved her family, she loved her friends, she loved her siblings. She was just overall a happy kid, a well-adjusted kid for the most part. So they thought it was bullshit that she would just run away for no reason. And I mean, it did turn out that they were right. But for months, this is what police operated under. They thought she left on her own, that she was just a runaway. Maybe she was off with a boy, even though her family completely disagreed with this. Elyse ran away, is what they would say to them. But in reality, her body was less than a mile away from her home, decomposing in a eucalyptus field. Elyse was gone, not missing, not run away, even though that's what police thought. And occasionally they'd get tips of people who said they saw her in other areas, which just kind of solidified the police's belief that she had run away. And though her parents did press conferences begging for their daughter to be returned, her case went cold and her body wasn't found for almost 9 months. And that's when the case warmed up again, and it didn't just warm up, it went from ice cold to hot, 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 and that is when a 17-year-old boy named Royce Casey came to the police station and admitted to not only being involved in the disappearance of Elyse Pahler, but her murder as well. He told police that he was there not only because he was riddled with guilt, as you would hope somebody would be after doing something as horrible as he did, but he was also afraid that his 2 other friends who took part in murdering Elyse alongside him were going to kill him next. So he told police everything and even ended up leading them to Elyse's body. The 2 other boys who took part in the murder of Elyse Pahler were 15-year-old Joseph Fiorella and his friend 16-year-old Jacob Delashmut. And Jacob Delashmut was not a stranger to Elyse. The 2 had gone to the same high school, at least at one point, though later he ended up getting expelled for drug possession and also for like cussing out a teacher. But before that, they had been in school together, and he had actually been at the same rehab center as Elyse at the same time. So the two kind of saw each other there. They at least had that in common, that, and they weren't really friends in school, and they weren't really friends at the rehab center, but this is where Elyse was first sort of put in on his radar, and then put on the radar of his two friends as well. And these two other friends were 15-year-old Joseph Fiorella and then 17-year-old Royce Casey, which was the boy who eventually came and turned himself into the police. And these three dudes were known as just sort of being not great. They were not good kids. Royce Casey was attending a continuation high school after he had been kicked out of public school, and Joseph Fiorella was now in homeschool after he also encountered problems in high school, where I believe he also attended with Elyse. But none of these boys were particularly strong academics when they were in school, and they had just basically stopped going to school altogether at some point anyway. The three boys were pretty heavy into drugs and alcohol, and not just like party drugs. They were into meth, speed, cocaine, acid, sniffing glue. They were just like doing the most. They were also into some warped version of Satanism and considered themselves to be members of the Church of Satan. They were super into reading all of Aleister Crowley's books and practiced animal sacrifices. And if that wasn't bad enough, they were also interested in sacrificing a virgin to Satan, calling this type of girl a Satan witch, and they wanted to sacrifice a pretty girl to put themselves in the devil's good graces. And they believed if they had the power and approval of Satan, their death metal band that they named Hatred would start doing super well and would go professional. Later, when the trio was caught, which I guess is a spoiler alert, but I feel like you can already tell that that's where this is going, Royce Casey said of why the group chose to murder Elyse, and I quote, "To receive power from the devil and help them play their guitars better so they would go professional." The youngest of the three boys, Joseph Fiorella, was the one who first brought up Satanism and kind of like put it out there like, "Hey guys, you like the devil or what?" And they were all like, "Yes, absolutely, I do." And he got super stoked, and this is kind of when the group's focus became all about Satanism, and because Joseph Fiorella became the group's sort of leader because he was the one who brought it up and he's the one who had the most knowledge on it. He started getting even more into it and started reading all the books and researching all the information he could find on the subject. He and the other boys started researching everything they could online about Satanism, the occult, the devil. They even each paid $100 to be card holders and priests of the Church of Satan, and they started taking to hanging out in graveyards because among all the other things on their little devil-worshipping resume, they wanted to add grave robbers onto the list. So the boys decided they were going to do this. They were going to sacrifice a virgin, and it was Joseph Fiorella who first brought up the subject of changing their dreams into a reality. And Jacob de Lashmut said of this conversation, and I quote, "It was harmless at first. We used to smoke weed, play guitar, just kick it. I was just really into heavy metal music." He says that Joseph then asked him if he'd be down to sacrifice a whatever, a virgin or whatever, and that he didn't take it seriously and just said, whatever. These boys said whatever a lot. But this wasn't as harmless as he thought it was going to be, and soon it was going to get a lot more serious. Royce Casey told prosecutors that the reason they chose Elyse was because, and I quote, "She had blonde hair and blue eyes, and because she was a virgin, she would be the perfect sacrifice to the devil." So the boys realized that they had a bit of an in with Elyse because since Jacob had been in, the rehab center with her, he knew that she liked to smoke weed, that she liked to drink, and that she liked to party. So they figured that they could get her to trust them and to hang out with them by offering her these things. And because Jacob, I guess, was the one of them that was the most socially equipped to talk to women at all, they used him to be the one to kind of recruit her into their friend group. And that's exactly what happened. Despite her best friend's protests, because they didn't think these guys were any good, Elyse, found herself interested in them. She found herself drawn to them. She was into their whole stupid little metalhead bullshit and their little stupid satanic symbols that they would paint. She found them to be interesting and different and outcast, and she wanted to be part of that. So they'd often hang out, they'd meet up, they'd drink, they'd smoke weed together. They were becoming her friends all the while. She had no idea that her new friends were literally planning to murder her the whole time. That's why they started talking to her in the first place. Apparently, before they actually did end up committing Elyse's murder, they had tried to kill her at least once, or at least this is what Royce Casey told police when he gave his confession. He told police that him, Joseph Fiorella, and Jacob DeLashmutt, and one other guy who I didn't get much information on because he wasn't there at the time of the actual murder, well, they had tried to kill her one other time before, that they had been like going out on a walk with her or something. There's two different accounts of how this happened, so I'm going to tell you what I believe is like the middle ground on it. And is that they had been like going on a walk with her, and one of the boys pretended to fall down a steep ravine. And so she went over to the edge and was like, oh my God, are you okay? And once she got to the edge, one of the other boys tossed him a knife and was like, do it, implying like kill her. And there was also a story that one of them pushed her down the ravine with him, which would make more sense because how would he kill her if she's up there and he's down there? And I also saw in a book that I read that her mother witnessed this and was able to be the one to stop it. But either way, no matter what thing happened, it wasn't taken especially serious because Elyse still talked to these guys and trusted these guys enough to go out with them the night that they ended up killing her. Shortly before Elyse was murdered, I think it was actually like the day before she was murdered, she was at a house party. And lo and behold, who else was there but her new, drug providing friend, Jacob DeLashmutt. And while they were there, she was just having fun hanging out with friends, and she started talking to Jacob, and Jacob was like, hey, listen, I just got some new drugs, I just got some weed. I think he said he had like acid as well. Do you want to come and do you want to like do it with us tomorrow night? And she's like, yes I do, and a plan was made. This is when the following night, Elyse stuffed her bed filled with her pillows and snuck off into the night, wearing only a sweatpants and a sweatshirt with no shoes. And she met the boys down at a eucalyptus field that wasn't far from her house, and they, smoked, did whatever, and decided that they wanted to go trip further into the eucalyptus fields. It was while in this eucalyptus field, under the cover of trees, that the boys decided this would be the perfect opportunity to ambush Elyse. Jacob pulled his belt from his waist and wrapped it around Elyse's neck, catching her completely by surprise because she thought she was just hanging out with some friends. Wasn't expecting anything like this. That's when Royce grabbed her arms and held her down on the ground, and Joseph Fiorella took a knife and stabbed her in the neck. The boys then took turns stabbing Elyse over and over. First, I believe it was Royce, and then I believe it was Jacob. And the medical examiner who did her autopsy said she had been stabbed approximately 12 times, at least 12 times. And the boy said that while she was laying on the ground bleeding, she was praying to God and calling out for her mom. These boys, once they realized that she wasn't dying fast enough, that the stabbing and the strangling wasn't working as fast as they had hoped, they stomped on her neck and then stood there and watched her die. And once they were convinced that she had died, which, spoiler alert, she hadn't, because it was later confirmed that none of her 12 stab wounds were fatal and she instead slowly bled to death, they drug her farther into the eucalyptus field, and when she was found, her pants had been pulled down. The boys, during their, after they were caught, they gave differing accounts about whether or not they sexually assaulted Elyse, but police believe that not only did they do it that night, but that they returned several times over the months that she was missing and continued to have sex with her dead body. Police probably believe this partly because of physical evidence and her pants being brought down, and also because these actual worms bragged about the murder to their friends. Not only about the murder, but about having sex with her body and having sex with her body for a period of time after she was dead. Later, once the boys were caught, these kids that they confessed this to did testify against them at trial, and they said the reason they never said anything sooner is because they didn't believe they were telling the truth. And it also came out that apparently Joseph Fiorella told his own mother what he did, which is a point that I'm like, I don't even know if I believe that could be true, because I don't know how a mother could hear this and not do anything. But I mean, we've heard of parents helping their stupid murderous kids before. Brian Laundrie. And you know, it's just too hard to even think about. Shortly after the murder, Royce Casey, the one who ended up confessing to the police, actually separated from the other two boys and ended up finding God. And it was his newfound religious guilt that brought him to the police station that day on March 13th, 1996, after he saw a missing persons poster of Elyse that haunted him. But this guy wasn't a good guy or anything. Yeah, he did turn himself in, but he did brutally murder this girl alongside these other two guys. And he wrote in his diary of the situation, and I quote, "I'm fighting on the other side now, allied with the darkened souls. Satan's raised and will conquer and reign. The Bible says in the end, Lucifer will bring out the best in everything. Music, love, murder. All the psychos, serial killers, and rapists didn't know that if they actually just built an altar of sacrifice and killed the person on the altar and then had repeated sex with the corpse, virgin meat is the ultimate sacrifice." Okay. Royce Casey didn't only come forward and admit what he did because God, you know, came into his life and scared him into doing so, but also because he believed that Joseph and Jacob were going to kill him next. The two boys had told him that she wouldn't be the only one, that there would be others, and he thought he would be the next one because he had distanced himself from them. And these boys, we'll find out later, were like super duper into Slayer, which, cool. But there was a line in Slayer that said, and I quote, "If you're not with us, you may no longer exist." And these boys took Slayer pretty seriously. So when he heard of that line and he knew of that line and he knew how they were, he was worried that since he was no longer with them, he would soon no longer exist. After Royce Casey gave his initial confession, he led officials to Elise's partially mummified remains that were found in the Nipomo Mesa eucalyptus grove. And this is where she had been left, and this was literally only a quarter mile away from her own home. All this time she was missing, and she was right there. When Elise's body was found, she was far too decomposed, because it had been like 8 to 9 months at this point. So she was far too decomposed to actually conclude whether or not she was raped physically through her body. And she had to be identified both through dental records, and then her parents identified her through a red, it was like a plastic bracelet. It was red with hearts, and her parents had to identify her through that, which is just, it gives me chills to think about. I wonder how difficult these cases are going to be since I'm going to be a mother now myself. And then I think about the fact that she was wearing literally a plastic bracelet made out of hearts. Like a little plastic heart bracelet, because she was an actual child, dude. Joseph and Jacob were arrested pretty fucking quick after Royce gave the confession, and Joseph even admitted that he was the ringleader, but that the other guys were just as into it as he was. Joseph Fiorella was the first sentenced, and he was sentenced to 26 years to life in prison as part of an agreement in which prosecutors dismissed other charges against him, including rape, in exchange for his guilty plea to first-degree murder. Elise's father said to Joseph Fiorella, and I quote, "Joseph, it's a parent's worst fear and lifetime pain to outlive their child. It's even worse knowing she was murdered, tortured, and raped as a virgin sacrifice on the altar of Satan so you could get your ticket to hell." Joseph Fiorella mostly denied Royce Casey's accounts of what happened that night, but he did admit that he was the first one to actually stab Elyse, and he said of Elyse and of the murder, and I quote, "I wish it never happened. Since it happened, I always pray to God to bring her back to life. I cannot imagine how her family must feel." I can't imagine saying something like that after taking somebody's child, but okay. Royce Casey was able to avoid a sentence of life in prison without parole by pleading no contest to first-degree murder, and was sentenced to 25 years to life, but he'd have to serve a minimum of 21 years before he would be up for parole. Jacob de Lashmut pled no contest to first-degree murder and was sentenced to 26 years to life, of which he would have to serve 85% of the term before being eligible for parole. I did also read that in 2 of the boys' sentences, Elyse's family was awarded restitution for what happened. But to this day, as far as I know, the last article I saw on this was 2017, but they had not received a dime of it. Elyse's father said of the boys, their sentences, and just the overall nightmare him and his family have had to endure, and I quote, "For many months we suffered through the nightmare of not knowing what happened to Elyse. When her body was finally discovered, I learned that she had been barbarically murdered, and I was consumed with grief. Although the defendants received prison sentences ranging from 25 years to life, it did little to ease the horror of what they'd done. The pain of losing my daughter and knowing she suffered will never leave me." So during the boys' trial, they tried to say that they only killed Elyse because they were influenced by the band Slayer. Are you familiar? They said that the lyrics of Slayer's music incited their murderous rage and made them do what they did. I don't know why they went with this defense and didn't try to use like the fact that they were on drugs, because they were at the time. I'm assuming it's because at that time it was like the popular time, because it was the 90s, the popular time to kind of blame the movies and media for the things you do, you know. Don't you blame the movies. Movies don't create psychos. Movies make psychos more creative. Stop it, man. Getting a little woozy here. I got off on a thing there a little bit, but I know there were definitely a lot of people at that time that thought movies, media, video games, music, all of that influenced people and made them into murderers. Some people still think things like that, but ultimately this defense was unsuccessful. But because the boys said that this is why they did it, Elyse's family actually sued the band Slayer. They stated that the band's lyrics incited the 3 teens to murder their daughter, and they were seeking, their lawsuit seeked monetary damages, and basically wanted to stop the practice of marketing violence towards juveniles. The case was delayed for a while, but in 2001 it concluded and it wasn't successful, and the judge said of the lawsuit, and I quote, "Slayer's lyrics are repulsive and profane, but they do not direct or instruct listeners to commit the act that resulted in the vicious torture murder of Elyse Pahler." The drummer of Slayer at the time, Paul Brostaff, responded to the lawsuit saying, and I quote, "They're trying to blame the whole thing on us. That's nonsense. If you're gonna do something like that, you should get in trouble for it." Which I tend to agree with. I'm of the mindset that music, movies, media like that doesn't create killers. You have to already have something like that in your head to see something like that, to hear music like that, and be turned into a murderer, because I mean, if that's all it takes, I'd be fucked with what I consume. Let's just say that. The music that I listen to, look at my shirt. Look at what I'm talking about. Look at the movies that I enjoy. I would be screwed. But it turns out it was nonsense also, because there's a lot of like back and forth on if Slayer and their music and the whole Satan thing even was the reason that they killed Elyse. They've gone back and forth on what their reasoning was, and Jacob Delashmet, God, I forgot, his last name is stupid. Jacob has said that it wasn't as cut and dry in that, and he said of it, and I quote, "The music is destructive, but that's not why Elyse was murdered. She was murdered because Joe was obsessed with her and obsessed with murdering her." So that opens a whole new can of worms that I don't even know. That we'll never know unless I say it, which they haven't, and it's been many years. Royce Casey, who is now 43, after previously being denied, was granted parole by the California Parole Board in March of 2020, or it might have been 2021, I forget. During the hearing, they found that Royce Casey had a nearly 20-year record of model behavior in prison and participated in a series of rehabilitation programs, served as a mentor, earned his GED, and was working on a specialized bachelor degree in psychology and sociology. He says if he's ever released, he wants to move to the Los Angeles area, my area, and work as a rehab for drug and alcohol specialist, something like that, in that field. Elyse's father, David, has actually come out and said that he supports Royce Casey being paroled, that he doesn't think that he is a danger and hopes that he would be like a good member of society if he was released. But he's not opposed to him being released and doesn't think that he needs to stay in jail any longer. Royce Casey has said of Elyse in, you know, his later years, and I quote, "She was a truly wonderful person who was loving, vibrant, enthusiastic, encouraging, and gentle. It breaks my heart to think how much she lost because of me. She never got to graduate from high school or go to her prom. She never got to go to college or fall in love and get married. She never got to be a mom. Those things broke through the denial that I had, and those things helped me to be able to see that there was something deeper I needed to look at to understand that it was my defects that led to this, not my co-defendants, not music, not drugs." The parole board said of Royce Casey, and I quote, "We find that the person who committed this crime and the person who sits before us today are two different people." After the parole board, the decision was sent to California's Governor Gavin Newsom, and he had the options of reversing the decision, referring it for further review, or to take no action, in which Casey would be scheduled for release after 30 days. The San Luis Obispo County DA wrote a letter to Newsom opposing Casey's release, saying, and I quote, "Casey has never adequately explained why he participated in such a sadistic and heinous crime." Gavin Newsom ended up actually reversing the parole board's decision, and Royce Casey is not going to be released from jail, just so you know. I don't know how you feel about that. Let me know what you think about that. Joseph Fiorella and Jacob DeLashmutt are both still in jail. They've both tried to appeal, and they've both gone up for parole, and they've both been denied and all of that, so they are still sitting in jail to this day. Since Elise's murder, her family has struggled to go on with their lives. After her body was discovered so close to their home, they moved immediately, which I understand. David, her father, had been a builder, but he lost interest in his contracting company, so he switched his job to take something that was less demanding so he could be home more. And his wife, Lizanne, has just bounced around into different teaching jobs, because I guess she's in the teaching field. They just seem sort of uprooted, you know. It seems like they never really were able to heal from that. And I know that they did some counseling, and they actually did start a foundation in Elise's name as well. It's a nonprofit to help locate missing children, and it's called the Elyse Marie Pahler Foundation. They claim to their church and their other 3 children, but they find that they have a little PTSD when it comes to how they deal with their remaining 3 kids. Lizanne, her mother, has said of this, and I quote, "My children don't have any real privacy anymore. Their letters in their room, I read them. I check out their music." And with that just depressing note, I'm going to say this is the end of the story. That was the story of the murder of Elyse Pahler, the murder that inspired the movie Jennifer's Body. What do you think? Isn't it just so insane? I feel like it's so sad because this girl was murdered for literally no fucking reason. It's so stupid. And at the hands of people that she trusted and considered her friends. It's just so sad, and I feel so bad for her and her family. They like lost her, and for literally no reason, so that these stupid little fucking metalhead shitheads could make their band better and make them play their instruments faster and harder and just be like rock stars. It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. When I hear it, I just get so annoyed, because like I know a lot of musicians, and like they're not stupid. Why were these kids so stupid? I don't know. It makes me absolutely insane, but she's gone forever. They're in jail for nothing, so. But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope you found it interesting and informative, and it gave you every bit of information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I want to thank you for hanging out and remembering Elyse with me today, because her story is just so sad. It was so pointless. She was so incredibly young, and I can't even imagine what those final moments were like for her. She must have been so scared and in so much pain. And just alone, but also so close to home. It's really hard to put yourself there mentally with her. Please let me know of any cases you would like to see me cover down below, either for morbid makeup or for spooky Hallowstein. My plan for Hallowstein, if you didn't see my announcement video, which if you didn't, you should watch it because there's some news in there, is to do one Halloween time murder and then one like this that's based on a movie or a crime that inspired a movie, or a movie that inspired a crime, something in that realm. So of course, leave me your suggestions down below, because I want to check out whatever you think is a good idea, because I know you're filled with good ideas and good taste. Otherwise you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell, because I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically, you, and if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is linked down below. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook page, and Facebook group, along with my nail polish, my earrings, all the makeup I used. It's all down there for your convenience. And I don't know if you saw, but I did it. I made merch. You guys asked me like 1,000 times, and I made some merch. I got a Chillin' Not Killin' shirt for you that was designed by my husband, which makes it very special and very cute. So check down below for that link. Can you believe that I did it? I can't even believe it. Now, with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and have a happy Hallowstein, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.